Kopali się. Widać ślady, samochodów, że jest grząsko.
When we drove down to the shores of Lake Salda, we tried to find a spot where we could stay for the night. As you heard, I immediately noticed signs that the ground near the water was soft and unstable, which meant camping right by the lake wasn't really an option. That limited our choices quite a bit because on the opposite side of the track there wasn't much usable space either. Almost the entire stretch was bordered by the steep slope. In some places it was thickly covered with conifers, in others completely bare, but still far from ideal for setting up camp. At one point we decided to turn back, since earlier we'd passed the place that might work. The problem was, with a drop on the left and a high embankment on the right, there weren't many options for turning around. I definitely wanted to avoid another off-road struggle. After all, we had been driving without front-wheel drive for 2 days already, and that alone made me think twice before venturing too close to the water. The ground was very loose, so I wanted to stay on the compacted part of the track, hardened by vehicles that had passed here from time to time, but the road was too narrow to maneuver comfortably. I quietly hoped I could climb a bit up the slope and turn around, but that proved to be wishful thinking. Unfortunately, at that point, I already knew I would have to descend lower. When it turned out that I didn't sink right in and the surface could actually hold the car, I decided to pick up some momentum and try to climb back up. But just when it looked like it might work, the rear slid sideways, and I knew we were in for another round of fun. Surface made of loose stones with no grip or bending is one of the toughest terrains you can deal with. The wheels spun helplessly, spitting out rocks while the car barely moved an inch. The tires had nothing to bite into, the ground offered no resistance, and something that looked like a minor obstacle suddenly became a challenge, especially when you only have drive to one axle. So I decided to approach it wisely. I found a relatively flat slope, engaged the rear differential lock, and climbed back up the track. After finding a suitable spot for the night, we went to see this natural wonder up close. It has to be said, the black and grey sand along the shore is truly striking. Its color, and reportedly also its healing properties for people with dermatological conditions, come from hydromenacite, a hydrated basic magnesium carbonate. The beaches of Lake Salda form a long, gently expansive shoreline. Right by the water, the sand beneath your feet is soft, while just a little farther away you encounter a surface that contrasts sharply with the classic postcard images of this place. Instead of soft, white sand reminiscent of Maldives, there is a raw, cracked crust of earth, dry, clay-like, and in places covered with a white mineral deposits. Across much of its width, the beach is rocky, only seemingly inviting for longing. In reality, the only spot suitable for that is a narrow strip about a meter from the waterline. Nevertheless, the campsite itself was perfect, so as the sun began to set, we started setting up a camp and preparing a delicious dinner made from products we had bought earlier at a roadside market.
Teraz to szybko dochodzi. Zaraz będzie za suche.
To zdejmij go, bo
Ja już
musi
go
chwilę
wyłączę,
odpocząć, tak, no. On powinien poleżeć na czymś, żeby odpoczął jeszcze. Naprawdę?
Good morning, guys. It's a beautiful morning in the Salda Golu. Look, beautiful flowers we have here. And just less beautiful stones. Driving on this surface is a nightmare, especially for such a heavy car that I have. We have experienced it a bit yesterday, but fortunately we were able to go up. But I will show you quite interesting bottom of the lake, which is called Maldives of Turkey. Probably due to the white sand that is all around. I've never been to Maldives yet. So there are funny things happening. I will show you and explain in the comment.
It might seem hard to imagine a more pleasant experience than wading into the crystal clear waters of Lake Salda, but the very first steps shatter that illusions almost immediately. Beneath the transparent turquoise surface there is no firm bottom, but something entirely different. A soft, treacherous mass that yields without resistance. Your foot sinks in deeply, surprisingly easily, sometimes all the way to the knee. Every step requires effort. Movement becomes slow and uncertain, and the body instinctively searches for balance. The bottom offers no support. It slips away, shifts, pulls you in. It's a strange, almost unsettling sensation, as if there were no solid ground beneath your feet, but a living substance reacting to every movement. The calm water surface, the silence, and the pastel colors of the landscape stand in stark contrast to what's happening below. This moment breaks the idyllic image of the Turkish Maldives. Instead of lightness, weight. Instead of ease, struggle with every step. And yet, it is precisely this contrast that makes this experience of Lake Salda linger in memory.
When all is said and done, when all is said and done, walk on, walk on. When all is said and done, all is said and done.
Lake Salda is an extraordinary body of water located in southwestern Turkey on the Anatolian plateau. It is one of the deepest lakes in the country. Reportedly, its bottom has never been fully measured. Measurements reached 190 meters and stopped there. The lake lies at an altitude of about 1140 meters above sea level, giving it the character of a mountain lake, and it covers an area of approximately 44 square kilometers. It is a tectonic lake formed by the movement of Earth's crust. It is surrounded by hills covered with a mix of pine trees, larches and junipers, which add to its charm and sense of untouched nature. Thanks to its exceptional clarity and its sheltered position, protected from wind on all sides, the lake reflects the sky and its surroundings, creating a spectacular mirror-like effect. This is a unique ecosystem, home to many rare species of plants and animals. The place fascinates not only tourists, but also scientists. Stromatolites occur here, geological formations created by microorganisms that are of immense scientific importance as they resemble structures found on Mars. This makes Lake Salda a particularly interesting object of study, especially since there are very few such places in the world. The water of Lake Salda is alkaline and rich in minerals, including magnesium, which contributes to its intense turquoise color, high clarity, and elevated pH. Sometimes during a journey, there comes a moment when you simply need to sit by the shore of a lake and focus on the simplest things. In silence, under a calm sky, in the warmth of the sun's rays, surrounded by turquoise water. And that's the thing. Up close, the water of Lake Salda looks nothing like it does from afar. Crystal clear, transparent, barely touched by blue. Every detail of the bottom is visible. Soft folds of the white sediment, the shadows of the gentle ripples on the surface. From the air, however, the water gains depth and intensity. Blue shifts into turquoise, then emerald, and finally sinks into deep navy. If you ever find yourselves in this area, make sure to visit this place. Another day and another destination ahead of us. This time, we're heading towards Anatolia, planning to see Hadrian's Gate, spend some time by the sea, and then continue into the mountains in search of the Uchinsu waterfall. Of course, we're not trying to do all of this in a single day. The schedule is fairly loose. We'll just see how things unfold, how far we get, and where we happen to find a good place to spend the night. From our campsite, we drive north along the western shore of Lake Salda. At one point, we discover an easily accessible spot leading down to the water, which naturally means it's quite popular with locals. That, in turn, brings some minor traffic challenges. Still, this might be useful information if you're planning to visit. There's no need to random awkward descents to the lake. You can simply drive to this area and then continue a bit farther along the shoreline to find a more secluded spot away from the crowds. The area around Lake Salda isn't particularly mountainous, but the shape of the land almost invites you to venture off the beaten path again. As you saw in episode 3 of this trip, Prowler's off-road capability had been seriously compromised after that brutal day in the terrain. I was driving with rear-wheel drive only, and honestly, I should have been avoiding bigger challenges. At least that's what common sense was telling me. But it's hard to deny your DNA, so instead of calmly sticking to the asphalt, I came up with the idea of taking a shortcut, which fairly quickly turned out to be far more demanding than it initially looked. When we finally made it back to civilization, we joined a dual carriageway and sped toward Anatolia. As is often the case on pure transit days, we focused on covering as much distance as possible, watching the scenery shift outside the windows. And it was surprisingly diverse, not only in terms of landscape, but also in how people here make use of natural resources. After about 30 kilometers, we came across a marble quarry. It was fascinating to observe the methodical way the stone is extracted from deep within the mountain. The rock terraces, or rather what looked like massive steps, and the nearly perfectly vertical walls of each successive cut, as if someone had sliced through the mountain with a single decisive scalpel stroke, were mesmerizing. The whole structure formed a hypnotic geometric composition, resembling a meticulously designed architectural model more than a fragment of natural terrain. Another 120 kilometers later, we reached Anatolia, where on a wet roundabout, we briefly caught a little drift before heading towards a hotel we had found online. Upon arrival, however, we changed our minds about staying there and decided instead to look for something wilder, ideally somewhere right by the water. So we drove east along the coastline, and after about 20 kilometers we arrived at the peculiar place filled with what looked like makeshift holiday cabins built directly on the beach. Almost all of them stood elevated on wooden stilts, suggesting that water levels here must fluctuate significantly. Nearly all of them looked as though they might collapse at any moment. A sight both gloomy and strangely fascinating. At first, we hesitated about driving deeper between these unusual structures, but eventually decided to take the risk and search for a spot for ourselves somewhere on the edge of this odd settlement.
Właśnie wiesz, oddali te wieżyczki tych kurde samych hoteli.
Poleć dronem.
No jutro, no z takiej drugiej strony, to przelecieć na tą stronę, to będziesz po roku.
Tu bieda, a tam taki
Splendor.
splendor, cały, nie? Złoto.
No tam coś jest, ale dalej są jakieś zabudowania. Tu? Co ty na to? Proszę?
Możemy tu postawić sobie.
The place was indeed right by the water, but unfortunately, the amount of trash scattered around didn't make it particularly inviting for an overnight stay.
Cześć! Ty jesteś przynajmniej przyjazny, co?
Still, dusk was settling in, and we didn't want to search for another location in the dark, so we decided to stay the night and continue further in the morning.
Na noc nic ci się nie stanie.
As the first rays of sunlight begin to illuminate the surroundings, the world fills with warmth. The very same place that felt cold and somewhat random the evening before now starts to breathe with light. The structures soften in the golden glow, and the fabric curtains no longer seem makeshift. They sway gently, almost homely. The air grows lighter. You can feel the warmth on your skin. The morning is unhurried. We eat breakfast slowly, without a plan, without rushing. We observe the surroundings as if watching a film about someone else's life. In one place, someone begins their day inside a small shack. Elsewhere, someone already stands by the water, focused, gazing at the calm surface of the bay. Farther along, silhouettes on the tip of the peninsula cast their fishing lines into the distance, in a silence broken only by the soft whisper of the wind. Every sip of coffee carries more awareness than usual. We are part of this scene, yet slightly outside of it. We recharge our batteries with sunlight, literally and metaphorically, On one hand, we are fully aware that this place is not perfect. On the other, it is precisely this ordinariness, this authenticity that allows us to truly feel the moment. The warmth of the morning light smooths up the sharp edges of reality. What seemed raw in the evening becomes genuine in the morning. Sitting in that quiet, we absorb energy not from a spectacular landscape, but from the simple beginning of a day in a place that, for many, is likely an escape from the noise of everyday life. Their refuge, not perfect, but offering relief. When we let go of judgment and stop viewing the place through the lens of our own expectations, habits, sense of aesthetics, and preconceived ideas, it becomes easier to feel its atmosphere, its authenticity, its role in the lives of countless people who come here simply to breathe. And suddenly, that feels like enough. Only the buildings of the luxury hotel in the distance, a striking contrast to the makeshift stilted structures, remind us of the many realities unfolding at once. It is an image of coexistence, two ways of life sharing the same frame, if only for a moment.
This time you're gonna make it. You will cross that line, come rain or shine. This time you're gonna make it. Through the darkest night, you will survive. You gotta stand your ground. No one can chain you down. You gotta raise up. Be braver, be bolder, be fire, be fearless.
The last few shots you saw were of Hadrian's Gate, a triumphal arch built in Anatolia in honor of the Roman Emperor Hadrian, who visited the city in 130 AD, as well as the buildings of Anatolia's old harbor, whose history dates back to around 150 BC, when King Attalus II of Pergamon founded Anatolia as a naval base. Strolling around the harbor area, you can step into small local shops selling handicrafts, antiques and souvenirs. The narrow streets leading from the port up the Kalesi are lined with boutiques offering jewelry and traditional Turkish carpets. It's a lovely spot for a short city break during an expedition, and one I can generally recommend. And here we are already in the Taurus Mountains, searching for a way to reach the Uchinsu waterfall. It's a picturesque, relatively untouched place, largely because of the gravel road that leads to it, keeping mass tourism at bay. Our navigation had a bit of trouble pointing us in the right direction, but the local residents came to the rescue. Thanks to their guidance, after a few more minutes on the rough track, we finally arrived at our destination.
So we found the reason why the showers sometimes have poor pressure, and it was all because we were missing this guy, the connector. So it was taking air here. And that's why we had no proper pressure in the water pump. and I will fix it. And it will be perfect. Yep. 2 minutes work. Let's see. Okay.
Works really.
Alright. Now I will put this back into our cooling window, and then I will sit down here and you will take a bath.
Uchinsu waterfall is not your typical tourist attraction. There are no large parking lots or crowds lining up for photos, but on summer weekends it does attract local families who come here in surprisingly large numbers to relax. Hidden in the heart of the Taurus Mountains, Uchinsu is part of the wild, almost untouched landscape in southern Turkey. The road leading to it is far from obvious, a gravel track at times demanding, winding through dense pine forests and rocky slopes that with every minute take you farther away from civilization. To make things more interesting, our navigation initially tried to guide us to the visible peak above, where, yes, the waterfall could be seen, but as locals told us evening before, we wouldn't have had direct access to it from there. The Taurus Mountains stretch here in waves of green and rock all the way to the horizon, creating a vast, untamed landscape in which Uchinsu is just one of many hidden secrets. The name itself means flying water, and it couldn't be more accurate. The water doesn't fall in one solid curtain. Instead, it splits in multiple streams that crash against the rocks, creating a fine mist that lingers in the air like dust. The volume of water depends heavily on the season and rainfall. When we visited, the waterfall was more delicate, a series of lighter streams cascading over limestone rock. Uchinsu actually consists of two waterfalls, upper and lower, separated by the short walk along rocky forest paths. The lower one is easier to access and feels more monumental. Water drops from a height of around 25 to 30 meters, hitting the rocks with a force you can feel as a cool gust in the air. At its base, a small pool forms, filled with cold, crystal clear water that rarely exceeds 15 Celsius degrees, even in summer, making it a perfect spot for a refreshing morning dip. The surroundings of the waterfall are raw yet full of life. The rocks are covered with moss and small plants that thrive on the constant moisture in the air. The shade of the slopes offers relief from the harsh sun, and the shallow shoreline of the pool invites you to step in and play in the water. No wonder this place draws locals like a magnet. What makes Uchinsu special is not just the waterfall itself, but the entire experience of getting there and being there. The lack of infrastructure makes you feel more like an explorer than a tourist. And that's exactly what we love and look for in our journeys.